Howdy, folks. Welcome to Grounded, a HomeLand Properties Roundtable Podcast, where we discuss land, timber, real estate, and everything in between.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another HomeLand Properties Grounded podcast. Today we've got Lone Star Forestry with us, Wayne Pfluger, Joe Pfluger, and of course our principal broker, Andy Flack, and myself, Miller Cox.
Well, Wayne, you and Joe tell us a little bit about Lone Star Forestry. Well, first of all, just point out, that this is the world headquarters here in Huntsville, Texas, of Lone Star Forestry.
There you go.
So we are at the bunkhouse today, as usual, for a Grounded podcast. But
All right.
welcome. We'd like to hear, let you tell the audience more about Lone Star Forestry.
Well, thank you first for having us. Yes, if it happens anywhere on this planet, it has anything to do with Lone Star Forestry, that is our world headquarters in downtown Huntsville. And first, just tell you a little bit about what foresters do. Just basically, most anything to do with land management. And the easiest way I tell people is it's almost a misnomer that Lone Star Forestry is on our door, because it's almost like Lone Star Land Management Services. We provide just about, if you have a piece of land and need some assistance, I think we have ways that we can help you. We do your typical forestry type stuff. We do prescribed burning. We paint boundary lines. We do forest management plans. We help people with their timber sales, actually bidding the sales and overseeing who comes out there to conduct the harvesting. We can have roads built, fences built, so just about anything you can think of. And we also, help out with the hunting and grazing leases and know what every one of these things should cost or how much you should make on each one of these projects. So having someone I always tell people, having someone on your side to guide you and help you along the way, and knowing what those things should entail as far as cost or income, and then what the product should look like when it's done. There's fences that are built good, and there are fences that are kind of shoddy. There's good logging jobs, and there's poorly done logging jobs. So we get into all those aspects of land management.
And that includes being able to evaluate somebody's trees. So if they've got, trees on their property, especially a majority of their property, you can go out and evaluate what those trees are worth and what somebody may be able to sell those trees for as an income source.
Right.
Now or in the future.
Exactly. But yeah, we do those timber appraisals. So yeah, I would say if someone's looking at some timberland, and we're happy to visit with them and do a consultation even before they sign the line on making the purchase. We've gone out and taken a look and given them some advice on what they should expect to see, expect to spend, expect to see an income before they even get serious about it.
Yeah, we're foresters by education and trade, but we really try to be those guys that you call once you get the property or before you get the property on any questions about the land.
Sure.
If we can't do it, either we'll figure out a way to get into that job, or we've got contacts in our Rolodex, if you will, to have someone to help you out with that. So we've got a really close network in the forestry world. Pretty much everybody knows everybody, which is really cool. The further I've gotten into it. So yeah, if we can't do a wide plethora of things, we've got other contacts that are able to do that.
Well, and I might add too that y'all also have some expertise in minerals and solar. These are some new things in the market, especially solar, new
Carbon
in the market.
Carbon.
Sequestration. Right. These are things that people aren't real familiar with, that they might need help with or expertise. And I know you guys are good at that. And if there's things that go beyond your expertise, timber tax exemption and appraisals and things like that. And you led into that a little bit in your introduction when you talked about a timber management plan. So maybe that's how we start. Why would a landowner need a timber management plan? So let's talk about tax exemption and timber management plans and how that came about, and why a landowner needs one of those.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So first of all, in the state of Texas, most states have some sort of tax break for agricultural lands.
Mhm.
So in other words, a farmer or a rancher couldn't possibly stay in business if his taxes just kept elevating based on the appraised value that that their appraisal district puts on those properties. So in Texas, there's these ag appraisal statuses that are with the appraisal district, and you have your ag appraisal status, which is your farming and ranching, cattle, cotton, corn,
Hey,
hay,
Livestock.
even bees.
even bees. So
Yeah.
that's your straight ag. And then you have your timber appraisal status, which you're actually growing timber and managing timber. And then the third one is a kind of a newer one, is the wildlife appraisal status. And they're telling the appraisal district that I'm managing this property for the management of wildlife. In the first two, the ag and timber ones, you're actually telling the appraisal district that I'm growing a commodity, an agricultural commodity, that at some point I'm going to sell some of this. I'm going to sell cotton. I'm going to sell honey. I'm going to sell cows. I'm going to sell timber. And then we can talk further with folks about the wildlife appraisal status, but that goes purely into just management for wildlife, and you have to meet some prerequisites to get into that one.
Well, of those three, Wayne, I mean, which one is better? I mean, so I know it depends on what property I have. Obviously,
Right.
if I've got a pasture property, then I'm only going to qualify for ag, maybe wildlife.
Mhm.
If I wanted to qualify for timber, I would have to plant trees. But we all know that ag status gets you a little better break than timber, and wildlife may be somewhere in between. So if I've already got trees, then I'm probably best trying to go for the timber exemption.
Well, if the appraisal district sees that the tract has timber pretty much dominating it, it's appraised at a little bit higher value than ag. So the appraisal district's always going to be looking and go, well, it's covered with trees. Well, we graze cattle on that. Well, it's covered with trees. They're going to go for that. They're going to go for that higher value,
Right,
you
of
know.
course.
And so that's where I'll just advertise us once again. Get someone that knows the ins and outs of this and can advise you and help you with that. Yes, ag is probably a little bit better than the timber appraisal status. But within the timber appraisal status, there gets into all these little nuances, like was it recently planted? Is it trees that are along a creek side, or what we call a stream side management zone? Is it an area along the side of a public road? That's what we call an aesthetic management zone. So there's little things, and whether it's pine or it's hardwood or it's a mix of both, there's different nuances that hiring a professional such as ourselves, we really dig into that for the landowner. And because we see tracts that someone may have the timber appraisal status on it, and it's just straight pine, and okay, they're paying $3,000 or X per year on taxes, and I've actually gone to those people and gone, well, wait a minute, you're not taking advantage of these other things. Let me help you do that, and knock their taxes back by 50% sometimes.
Yeah, you did that for me.
Yeah. Knock your taxes back by 50%. There you go, Andy. There you go. And, you go, well, I'm already under the timber appraisal status. Yeah, but you're not taking advantage of all these things. And what you have to remember is once you get into those different categories, is that's not just this year. That's, Andy, yeah, I knocked your taxes back by 50% for as long as for a long time, till they lose. Yeah. So
as a new landowner, if I buy a property that already has an ag exemption on it, do I get that automatically? But I think listeners might want to know, what do I have to do to make sure I get that going forward?
You have to kind of apply for it, don't you? Reapply
Sure.
once you purchase. Is that right?
Yeah, so I would say that's a really important thing to look for when you're buying land,
Mhm.
when they're shopping with you guys or anyone else,
Sure.
to see if that property has that status with the appraisal district. If they do, it's really easy to convert that to the new landowner. You've got to
Mhm.
apply by a certain date every year, April 30th every year. It's an important date to remember.
Yeah.
Apply by that date, and you can basically transfer that status to the new landowner.
Mhm.
If you miss that, there's a window where they give you a little bit of forgiveness to where you can still get into it the next 2 years typically. But if you're buying property that doesn't have it initially, you've got to get in that process technically for 5 years.
Mhm.
Doesn't always take 5 years, but ag or timber usually takes 5 years to get into initially.
Yeah.
So it's really important to look for property that has that benefit on
Right.
it already, because you get that appraisal status simply by applying, continuing the timber management, continuing the ag practices that you're doing on
Right.
that property, and you don't have to wait that 5 years. With that third status that Wayne was talking about, you have to be in ag or timber for 5 years in those statuses before you can apply for wildlife. So it's those two are kind of prerequisites for wildlife, but there's some additional nuances that benefit you for getting wildlife. You don't have to worry
Interesting.
about cutting timber anymore. You don't have to worry about your livestock, cutting hay on your property. You do have to maintain wildlife aspects and a plan and submit a questionnaire every year, but it's not, you don't have to worry about the timber or the livestock on your property anymore.
So I'd go on and carry on what you were saying a little bit, Joe. And if I were a person shopping for a piece of land, I would ask the realtor and talk to you guys
Mhm.
about, what does this property have on it?
Absolutely.
And that would be a prerequisite for me shopping for a piece of
Mhm.
property is what does it currently have, ag or timber or wildlife on it? Because that would benefit the next landowner, because you
Right.
can transfer that forward.
Yep.
The other thing is I would just tell people, and my shopping, I would say if you're looking at 5, 6, 7 acres, if you could possibly stretch yourself a little bit to get up to that minimum acreage. Most counties, it's 10 acres. Some counties are 20 acres. So I'd kind of look into that before you get real serious about a certain
Just jump
property.
into it,
Yeah, and because here's what you have to think about. You could buy that 8 acres, all right, and the taxes each year would just be up here.
Mhm.
Where if you went ahead and stretched yourself out to 10 or 12 acres, it might hurt you right here, or be a stretch for you here, but then your taxes are going to be just a few $100s a year.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I would really look hard at the possibility, what it currently has on it, or maybe the possibilities of what it could have happen on it, because taxes are year in and year out.
Yeah. And just to give y'all an idea of which one is better than which one is best out of those three, it really depends. I mean, that's a big thing in forestry,
Sure.
probably inland in
depends.
general. It depends. And not everyone likes that answer, but
Yeah.
it's the primary use of that property is what the appraisal district is looking for. So
Mhm.
like Wayne said, if you have trees on it, but you have cattle, which one is the predominating factor, or which one is the predominating practice? Sometimes it is cattle, sometimes it is timber.
Mhm.
It's whichever one is the primary use of that property, and that can change depending on whether they're
Sure.
looking at it hard or not. But the values of those, to give kind of a brief understanding on how that tax break works. I also want to say too, it's not an exemption. We say it's an exemption all the time too, but on their website, Texas Comptroller's website, it's a property, it's a tax status,
Hmm.
a
Special appraisal status.
Well, I think they changed that over the years, because
Yeah.
originally, or used to be, it was an exemption. When the state government passed it, that's what they were doing. They were exempting agriculture from straight property taxes to benefit farmers, ranchers, foresters, operators of agricultural property. And so, to give our listeners just a real general idea of what taxes cost, is we normally see ag status at $1 to $3 per acre. And this is across a whole wide area of counties in Texas. We obviously spend most of our time in East Texas. And then for timber, we usually say $5 to $10 an acre per year. And then wildlife is generally somewhere in between. So that's, I know some of you listeners might catch me on this a little bit. You might find a timber property at $11 an acre, but or you might find one at $4 an acre a year, but I'm giving you a real general number
Right.
so you have that in your mind, because I feel like that's probably a question somebody's going to ask. So if you got 100 acres of pasture and it's ag exempt or special property evaluation, it could be as low as $100 a year in property taxes.
Right.
And it really depends on where that property is located on how
That's
much you
correct.
can save per year.
Yeah.
Because some people think, even whenever I initially got into it, I told people it's 5 to 10% of what you would normally pay. But that depends too, because if you buy property in Harris County,
Yeah.
and you get, and that valuation is $20,000 per acre, and you get a timber status on there, it can significant. I mean, it's 1% of what your taxes would be.
Sure.
But then if you have property that is maybe 2,000 per acre and you get it down, then that percentage comes up. Still incredible savings.
And I'll just say that's what we've noticed is back maybe when you and I started, Andy, the difference between what a land was fully appraised at versus the ag or timber appraisal status, the savings was, 40%, 50%, and people didn't pay close attention to it. But as land values increase in our area, the margin, what Joe was alluding to, the margin of savings is just getting further and further apart.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we have properties we manage down in Harris County or down on the Loop in Conroe that without the timber appraisal status or the ag appraisal status, it would just be astronomical. You could buy a new car every year for what they pay in taxes. Yeah. So that's why when you are driving around the Beltway in Houston or on 99 in Houston, you see neighborhoods, but you see cattle on this 20 acres. Well, they can afford to hang on to that property because they have the ag appraisal status.
There's a good reason those cows are on there.
There's a good reason those cows are on there, right?
Those ag and timber rates stay the same across the state. It's that market value that fluctuates. So depending on how big that gap is, that's how much you save.
Yeah.
But I do want to say too, it's your responsibility as a landowner, once you have that status, to ethically and honestly maintain that status. So now that you have that timber status on it, that doesn't mean you just do nothing. You need to manage your timber in a responsible way that produces income from that in some way, shape, or form. And that can vary a lot.
And going back to what Andy was saying about the how much per acre you're paying on timber or ag, the other part of that is it's up to the landowner too. Timber is a little bit more passive. Trees don't get out of the fence, all right, and so forth. But they have their own risk and they have their own management degrees of management that you need to keep up. But I've had many landowners, fine, I'll pay $400 a year rather than $200 a year for ag because I really don't want to deal with cattle. I'm good with trees or cutting hay or whatever, because you got to think that's added. Those are a little more high end expenses than timber can be. It's
when
a
it's
little more
also
passive.
a longer term,
rotation,
time frame rotation as well.
Right.
Well, let's talk about a few of those activities that you need to do if you own a tree farm. If you have a property and you've got trees, you want to call it your tree farm, that's great. That's what it is. But some of the things that you ought to do, every year or 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, things like that, that would show that even though it's passive, you're still actively participating in trying to manage the property for timber.
So number one, you said participation. So first thing I do is strongly encourage people to be a member of the Texas Forestry Association. That shows the appraisal district that you are actively and you're involved in forestry. And then we get a lot of folks involved in the tree farm program, which is a free forest certification, but you have to show that you are actively managing the property. So I would say involvement in TFA and tree farm are two good things, a good start.
and those are in their guidelines or their code. It says those organizations specifically.
Mhm.
So,
Well, there's also some
yes.
local, organizations, for instance, Southwest Piney Woods Landowners
Right, right.
Association.
That's right.
So it covers 4, 5, 6 counties
That's
in
right.
our area, but there are other organizations like that
Yep.
that reciprocate in different areas across East Texas. So being involved in that, Southwest Piney Woods Landowner Association is free
Yep.
to members just to be involved. So that's a good point. But then keep going with other things that they can do.
Yeah. So, it's more than just cutting trees. It's planting trees as well, but you're managing a forest. So in the forestry world, for instance, we don't necessarily have to have fences for our boundaries. So you might see quite often the boundary lines, or you'll see paint on trees
Purple
going through the
paint.
woods. And there's the purple paint law. So the purple paint, we paint our boundary lines, the boundary lines that we work on with purple paint. And it satisfies two things. It clearly delineates your property line. The saying, good fences make good neighbors. Well, just a good, clear boundary line
Right.
makes good neighbors, So I always tell folks, you spent this money to have a survey done when you're buying this property, and then if you just don't do anything, then the woods will grow up and it'll disappear. So
Yep.
it's always a little tough to tell those folks, hey, you need to spend a little more money and let's mark that boundary line. And we do the purple paint, which, as I said, delineates the property line, but it also adds a degree of liability protection because it is a no trespassing sign in the state of Texas. If someone crosses that purple painted line, they're trespassing. And so if someone comes on your property and has an incident, you just turn around and go after them for trespassing.
That's a good example of an activity too that shows that you're an engaged landowner.
That's right.
But just I don't want to get down too far a rabbit trail, but
Yeah.
that purple paint,
Yes, sir.
you can't just go to Walmart and just buy a can of purple paint and spray it on a tree. It's supposed to match
Correct.
certain guidelines.
It is.
In a certain color,
Yes, sir.
purple.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I often see people that have done that, and it's kind of a mess what they've done in the woods. I guess it does help,
Yes,
Sure.
sir. Yeah.
but
yeah.
it's not, from a no trespassing law standpoint, it doesn't meet that guideline.
Correct. It needs to be a certain color purple.
Yeah.
And
Certain height and width.
and
as well in the woods.
and it has to be at a certain height on the tree and a certain width on the tree. And we go the extra mile, and we actually blaze the trees, which is we scrape a little bark off and put a good
Which
coat of
does no
paint on,
harm to the tree.
which does no harm to the
Lasts
tree.
a lot
Yeah.
longer too.
Yeah,
I
it
would
lasts
say.
a lot
Yeah.
longer. And then we follow that also with, we put signs up that explain what the purple paint law is, and that it's a no trespassing sign. But
another
other
reason why
yeah.
that's so important too is you pay this money to get your property surveyed that you just bought. Typically, surveyors will just do corners. Say it's a rectangle, they just do those 4 corners. You can pay additionally for them to do more than that, but you just invested a couple $1,000s in that. If you don't do anything, 5 years, those wooden stakes are gone.
Yeah.
Mother Nature takes back over.
So rather than getting your property resurveyed after that time, put the purple paint on, and then it's permanent.
Yep.
And then after that,
Yeah.
maybe you can look into doing some burning or herbicide.
Correct.
There's a lot of things you can do to keep
Right.
the understory down. For instance,
Right.
talk about that a minute.
Yeah, so other management activities, and one of the things we just love doing is our understory burning.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So y'all are licensed, certified, whatever the terminology is, to burn
right.
You've got your red card, right?
in the state of Texas.
Well, it's not a red card.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I would say if you were to be interested in having a prescribed burn done on the understory, we actually burn under the woods. And if anyone wants to get a good example of that, just drive through the National Forest here in the New Waverly area, or anywhere in East Texas. You can drive through the National Forest and you can see what understory burning does. And we're licensed by the state of Texas through the Texas Department of Agriculture. So if someone wants to have a prescribed burn done, I'd highly recommend they get one of these TDA licensed and insured prescribed burn managers.
You wouldn't recommend somebody try burning it themselves.
No.
Legally, you can.
Legally,
have
you
the
can.
right to,
Yeah.
but the landowner is liable for that.
Yeah.
If you hire someone that burns and doesn't have that certification, and something happens, that landowner is still liable. So you have the right.
You have the right.
We've seen in the state of Texas, 2011, 2023, two great examples of dry years where we had humongous wildfires.
Yeah.
Of course, last year, the big one in the Panhandle, but that's why you don't burn yourself.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that certification, we're licensed by the Texas Department of Agriculture, and we have to meet certain requirements. And one of those is an insurance policy that, and by statute, it takes the liability off of the landowner and puts it just directly on us.
Mm-hmm.
So if there were some sort of incident, the landowners is protected.
That's good. to
So
know.
I would highly recommend, if you are interested in doing that, look up on the TDA website and find one of those licensed and insured prescribed burn managers. And that's the only way I would have my place burned. Yeah.
It's one of the best tools you can use on your forest. It's one of the most cost effective tools, but yeah, you've got to be
Then
super
Gotta be
responsible.
careful.
And the purpose is to keep that understory and that competition down. And then obviously, if you want to recreate or you want to hunt, anything like that in your woods, that's going to help you a lot, because in a few years, the Yopon's going to take over and it's going to be 6 foot high and you won't even be able to walk through it.
Yeah.
So burning is the most effective way to control that. But there is herbicide applications that you could do
Right.
that would accomplish similar results, but a little more costly, right?
Correct. Yeah. So that's the thing is, to knock down that wildfire risk, to improve wildlife habitat, to make it more aesthetically where you can see through your woods and see what you have and enjoy what you have. A number of other benefits to these different things you mentioned. So yes, herbicide is one tool we use, and it just depends. It depends if it's the right fit. We might recommend herbicide treatment. Mechanical, there's mulching, and a lot of people spend enormous amounts of money on mulching, and then I'm going, why?
It's pretty.
It's pretty.
Instant gratification. It's immediate.
Right.
True.
But what I tell people with prescribed burning is, this country burned. I mean, the natives would light fires in order to attract wildlife. And I always say and Mother Nature would, lightning strike and there would be fire. So the single most cataclysmic event that happened on this landscape for eons was fire. And the wildlife, and I get people asking me questions about, what about the raccoons or what about the birds? And I said, well, the birds and the raccoons know what to do.
Yep.
They're here because of that event. The trees we have, the flora, the fauna we have is because of that event. Over the eons, they developed and got used to fire. So it's always fun when we're doing a prescribed burn and you start seeing the hawks and the kites start flying, because they know.
Oh yeah.
They know what's about
to come to the
They
smoke.
they see the smoke and
Absolutely.
they come. Yes. Oh yeah. And the deer and the raccoons, they get out of the way. And what's interesting is, we've had people say, "Oh, you just ruined our hunting season with that prescribed burn." And then 2 weeks later, all this little green growth's coming back, and they go, "Oh my gosh,
Fresh food.
we've seen deer that we've never seen before." Yeah.
The next couple of rains.
Yeah.
Not even that. I mean, it's
Right.
very fast afterwards.
Yeah.
I would say too that is the best way to mitigate wildfires. So we've had these really bad wildfires lately. If all those woods had been burned routinely every 2 to 3 years in the past, they could have put those out.
Yeah, California is a good example of
Yeah.
that. So it's a shame.
Yeah, I have stories of wildfire jumping the road onto client properties of ours, and the rancher coming up to me almost in tears. "Why, we saved the ranch?" "Oh, well, yeah, because we kept it burned, and the fire was shooting out of the tops of trees, and we went over there and stomped it out after it jumped the road." I got a couple of stories where that happened. So
If you can mitigate that fuel, that's the best tool to fight fire. There's funding opportunities out there from the Texas Forest Service that just opened up right now that we're applying for landowners for prescribed burning. The biggest reason for that is to mitigate on a bigger scale the amount of fuel that's out there. It's not to make your place look pretty. It's not anything else. It's to mitigate those fuels
that
close
fuel
to
management.
communities and counties, close to national forests. So it's really important.
So you bring to light another point I kind of think would be important to make on getting a consulting forester or land manager such as ourselves involved. We talked about how we can help you on your property taxes. But the other thing is, and I also mentioned that we know how much things should cost and how much money you should see from doing these different things. But another thing we help people a lot with are funding opportunities to do a lot of these things. So Joe briefly mentioned the U.S. Forest Service and the Texas A&M Forest Service have grant opportunities for prescribed burning. But we also get a lot of people involved with the Wild Turkey Federation for different projects. There's the Longleaf Alliance that helps out with tree planting and prescribed burning. The USDA also has a very large program, the EQIP program, that we get a lot of people involved with. And I mean, that program pays for site preparation, prescribed burning, tree planting, and you name it. So a consultant on your side is also, we bring so many things to the table, I think.
Well, and that all kind of comes back to having a good management plan for your property initially. It benefits you in all those ways.
There's no doubt.
A good management plan does, and it tells you about those.
Stewardship. I think we all are interested in conservation, preservation, and stewardship of the lands that God gave us. So, well, this has been great listening and hearing and learning about all these things. I think it leads me to want to do a future podcast in the woods with Lone Star Forestry while they're burning.
We'd love to have you.
Yeah, we'll pick up where we left off on this conversation about burning and let the audience actually see it burn in progress. I know we've done some of these videos before.
That would be fun.
Yeah, I think we could do a in the woods podcast, if you will, and let everybody see how that works. Burns, you mentioned a while ago what the benefit are of the burns, but they're just fun to watch.
They are.
Because I don't think a lot of people see on the news these roaring fires that blow through the panhandle and stuff like that. But when you see a controlled burn, typically for the most part, they really don't get that hot. Like they're not going to burn through the woods and cook a turtle.
Yeah.
Because they're just not that hot. They're burning the leaves, the dead debris, and they're burning the unwanted species such as yopon. Yopon itself gets pretty hot, especially the tops of it. And so I think if we could show a visual of that,
that'd be fun.
Understood better. So anyway, I appreciate you guys coming out today.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
This is very beneficial. We'll do it again.
All right.
And I look forward to seeing y'all in the next episode of HomeLand Properties Grounded.